Dr. John Bruni has arrived. Cup of coffee in hand.
Indeed.
Sage International.
Thank you, sir.
Focus podcast.
Indeed. Yes.
Yeah. What's the world doing at the moment? Teetering on the edge
Of nothingness.
Tell me about this.
Anarchy.
Yeah, that too.
How is this thing going on in Iran when we are told that the framework for a settlement is there?
Yes.
And we're just some final small touches. And the guys in Iran say, nope,
Yep.
it's all bull.
Yep. Yep.
Why would the Americans expose themselves to that sort of international ridicule?
I could be really crude about this and say something on air that will get me booted off here. I won't do it, though, but I think you'll understand when I say it's like a sword-swinging contest between these two groups. And I think for all the weirdest of reasons, because one thing that isn't being said right now, or at least it's not being said enough, and that is that there's a lot of positioning going on. The Iranians are seeing just how far they can push the Trump administration to do something stupid.
Right.
They are ready for, another martyrdom operation where they sacrifice themselves, their leadership and or their entire country, just for the privilege of then being seen to be the victims of American aggression, which plays very well in the global south, weirdly enough. I mean, we may not understand it, but you've got to get into the mindset of the IRGC and what they think about their role in the world. Their role in the world is to push the Americans to such a degree that the Americans will overstep, do something stupid, and even if the IRGC fails and fails catastrophically, they are martyred. They go down in history as great Iranian leaders, great strategic thinkers, great whatever. That is the mindset that we're dealing with. But in the meantime, there is a more practical and mundane aspect that's happening right now. So we've got the blockade of the blockade. The Americans have apparently waylaid about, I don't know how many oil tankers, but at least 6 million barrels of oil that have come out of Iranian ports. So that's been taken off the market, and they've parked these vessels somewhere. The Iranians need the funding from their their shadow fleet to ensure that they have money to pay themselves and their allied personnel in Tehran and elsewhere within Iran. Yeah. Now, if they don't get access to that, then you'll end up seeing splits within the IRGC itself, because you know what? You can play the martyr all you like, but if you can't feed yourself, your children, house yourself, or anything else, you then start questioning the veracity of your own leadership.
Yes.
And I think that this is what the sensible people in the Pentagon are playing for. I think that they know that the clock on Iran is ticking. And all they need to do is apply a bit more pressure, a little bit more leverage, and just, stay their course. And eventually they will get what they have always wanted. And it wasn't the nuclear deal that they want. They want the Iranian leadership completely out. That's what they're playing for.
Regime change.
Yes. Now, this can happen, and not as a consequence of the war. I think for the Iranians, they're always in danger of overplaying their hand. Because if they then decide, okay, we'll sign off on whatever peace agreement that Donald Trump puts before us, there is always the prospect, and I think we're starting to see those ructions start emerging. There's always the prospect of the Iranian people then breathing a sigh of relief and saying, oh, thank God the Israelis and the Americans aren't bombing us now. Now we can turn our attention to our leaders. Because you remember, before the war started, there was a lot of tension between the Iranian leadership and the Iranian people. Mm-hmm. And then there was the Iranian leadership massacring a number of Iranians. Some people say up to 30,000. Yeah. More conservative estimates anywhere between 5,000 to 8,000. But irrespective, it was a massacre. Now, once the exigencies of war are over, then you end up having the Iranian people think about, well, what do we want? And now the IRGC, they're quite happy to continue kicking the can of war down the road, because the more they do that, the more likely the average Iranians, will rally around the flag and keep true to not causing any domestic strife. But as soon as the war is over, people will want, they will want their water, they will want their electricity, they will want their internet, they will want all those things that make a functional society functional. And if they don't get it, because the IRGC is too afraid of giving them a little, because then they'll want the lot, then they'll probably find their way into the dustbin of history at some point.
They've turned the internet back on, I believe. Why did they do that?
Yeah, well, again, this is what I'm saying about the ructions are starting to happen. I mean, they're trying to give a little bit of. What did Joe Bielke-Peterson used to say about the media? Throw
like feeding the chickens.
Just feed the chickens. Just feed the chickens. So the Iranians are feeding the chickens in the hope that they can stave off the worst of Iranian popular anger at their leadership for having put themselves in this vulnerable state. So I think that you're starting to see the Iranian leadership panic a little bit. Thinking, well, we've been such poor stewards of this country, and if we keep on just driving the people into the ground, the people will rise up. That is a problem, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, with the massacre that the Chinese, Tiananmen Square, when they shot those students, I don't know how many they actually shot.
No one does.
But it didn't it did quell the uprising, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But
you'd have thought it would have solidified the opposition.
Look, the opposition, like any political movement in any country, I mean, they go through an evolutionary cycle, and sometimes the government, the powers that be, will crush them, break them up. Then they will reform in either a greater or lesser extent, depending on the motivations that they have to challenge the powers that be. In China, the CCP was always a powerful entity, and it wasn't being beaten up by the Americans militarily. The IRGC has been beaten up by the Americans militarily. I think that when we finally find out just how much damage has happened to the Iranian leadership, we shouldn't be surprised to know that they were hit far harder than what the media has reported. And I think that it's now at this point of vulnerability that I can see that some of the things that ordinary Iranians were wanting, like, get rid of the leaders, will be happening as soon as the firing stops, so long as there's a break. Because, when you're in a wartime situation, it's the same thing with Nazi Germany, you're worried about bombs falling on your head, you're worried about making sure that you've got enough food, making sure that your kids are okay. I mean, there are so many individual things that you're worried about. You're not worried about the political leadership. You're worried about your own survival, the survival of your nearest and dearest. That can sometimes be mistaken for rallying around the flag. But what it is actually is that people are so intent on survival that they just don't take to the streets. This is the mistake that Trump made. I mean, his public signaling has been, I don't even know if there's an adjective in the English language. It's just been so all over the joint. It's so chaotic. I want the Iranians to go out there. I want this, I want that. Why aren't the Iranians going out in the streets? Yeah, we're bombing them. Would that person go out on the streets when a foreign country is bombing the United States? I don't think so somehow. So again, it's fine for us not in Iran, not being bombed, to say, well, the Iranians should take to the streets because the Americans are liberating them. No, they're not. The Iranians and the Israelis were bombing the living stuffing out of that place. And don't forget, one of the first strikes went into a girls' school and killed over 200 girls. Right? Yeah. So again, people are mindful of those kind of risks to themselves and to their family. Yeah. So they're not going to take to the streets, and they're not going to go and give the Iranian authorities any problems. But they will when the fighting stops.
Let me take a call. Hi. Who's there?
Peter.
Oh, Peter. From Queensland.
From Queensland, yes, mate, yes.
What do you want to add to the conversation?
Mate, I want to bring up a conversation. I think we should sack every one of these politicians and put in managers.
Sack the politicians, put in the managers. What do you think?
The thing is, if we had managers working in there as for the people, getting the best deal they can for the people with all our resources, then they get a certain salary to start off with, but they get a bonus for every $1 million or $100 million that they get from our resources back into our a Sovereign Citizens Fund.
Yeah, we were just talking about Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump isn't a politician. He's a real estate developer.
That's right.
Is that better in your book?
Well, being a real estate developer, no, not really, but a professional business person that's ran, say, a transport company, a fencing company, or whatever, that's had the experience to be able to know how to balance the books and to get best value for the dollar. That's what we need. We don't need half-wit politicians They've got no experience. We need people that know how to do the job.
What do you think, John?
Right, Peter, I think it's an interesting point that you raise, but one would say that China is under that sort of leadership. I mean, okay, we look at the CCP as a totalitarian state and all, but in fact, they are managers of a sort. And they are redistributing various bits of Chinese wealth to wherever is needed, firstly into the CCP back pocket, but also to people who support the regime. I suppose that would be the only kind of outcome of a situation like that. The other thing that you have to also realize is that in the United States, the populist right-wing rebellions that have taken place, the MAGA and all that kind of thing, was about draining the swamp. What was the swamp? It was about a perception that both the Democrats and the Republicans, the old-school Republicans, formed a political clique that was basically managing America but not looking after the American people. So, how you couch your structure in a way that the managers don't separate themselves from the people that they're managing, and so that the people feel that they're invested in what their leadership is doing, is anyone's guess. Because so far, we've got two examples that I've just raised, and it didn't work out well for either. At the moment, America is lurching from crisis to crisis, and if you go back to China, this managerial model that the CCP has put onto China has worked up to a point, but I think even there is a shelf life on these kind of systems because people just get sick of being told what to do. And there comes a time where people just rebel against what they see. And, it could be, well, in the West, it's the rise of the populist right. And in places like China, it's an outbreak of, protests and whatnot and sometimes revolution.
The whole Australian system has been corrupted since 1950. They've been stealing off us. They've been stealing off our natural resources. The money that should have been going into a sovereign fund for the citizens has been disappearing. They've been giving money to countries that they shouldn't have given money to. They gave money to the Clinton Foundation. I'm talking about Gillard here in particular. She gave money to the Clinton Foundation, then went to work for them as a consultant. This sort of stuff's got to stop. We do not need and we do not want to be giving all of our money away to third world countries. If they can't support themselves, that's their bad luck.
Well, if you look it up, Peter, you'll see that Australia has given something like 300 and something million to the under various prime ministers to the Clinton Foundation. God knows why.
Because it's corrupt. They get feedbacks. The whole thing is corruption, and the money that we're giving them. Like when you give the money to them, they say, okay, there's 50% you, 50% me, but it never gets publicised like that. The money that goes out to third world countries in aid never gets to the people. It gets to the politicians, and it gets fed back to whoever gave it to them. A portion of that money gets fed back, I believe.
Yeah, Peter, I think that you're right. To a degree, you're right. But then look at what the Americans have done with winding back, an agency like the Center for Disease Control and USAID. Now, whatever you may think of international aid, currently there is an Ebola outbreak happening in Africa. The Americans who used to lead these international ventures to contain these diseases are no longer what they once were. And I don't know about you, but, the idea of, some guy from Africa with Ebola getting on a plane and landing somewhere in Australia and then sparking off our first Ebola outbreak doesn't fill me with a great deal of confidence, although it is a possibility under current conditions. I do agree that charities, and look, the United Nations, I can say because of my own experience in Africa, when you go into places like Ethiopia, the one thing that you'll always note is that for every off-beaten, mud-filled track, there are half a dozen Toyota Land Cruisers in absolute pristine condition run by the United Nations, and all they end up doing basically is running to Addis Ababa nightclubs and having a great old time of it. So yes, there is corruption, and yes, there has to be someone who, I don't know, watches the watchers or whatever. We put people in responsibility and then we think, oh yeah, they're responsible enough, they can take care of matters, and then they don't. And then we get disappointed. And then we think, well, what's happening with our money? Who's accountable? It does come down to the people that we pre-select in the political party process. It does come down to the political process itself and how resilient it is to be able to hold politicians' feet to the fire when clearly there has been a misappropriation of funds. I don't see that. I don't know whether the system will improve under a more autocratic system. I don't think so, because in an autocracies are generally renowned for not being accountable for anything they do. In a democracy, we've got systems, but if they're not implemented correctly, then of course we end up in a similar situation to an autocracy where, politicians will go around, they'll take government money and have a private helicopter trip here or there, or they'll do whatever they do, and then it becomes a media story and we all laugh or maybe get outraged by it. But it's just a blip in the radar, really.
Thanks, Peter. John Bruni's with us. He's our special guest.